The snow hadn't quite melted from the porch steps when I first saw him again. 3 weeks had passed since we said goodbye, and I'd convinced myself he'd never come back.
Swallow it up.
But there he was, a young bobcat,
Such a brave
leaner than
bobcat.
before, standing tall in the morning light with a
See the
single
dog
spruce
time.
branch
Medication
clenched
will put it
between his
right up.
teeth.
Okay, that's a relief to
Not
hear.
a deer
Thank
bone,
you.
not prey. A branch. He placed it gently at the foot of the door, then looked up at me,
I just
his
delivered
golden
the package.
eyes
I don't make the
steady
rules.
and unblinking. And then he chirped. That sound. I hadn't heard it since the day I opened his cage in the clearing and let him walk away. But the moment he made it, I knew without doubt. This was the same wild cub I'd cradled like a child. The one who used to tap my wrist 3 times in perfect rhythm just to make sure I was still there. The one who refused to sleep unless I sat beside him, quietly humming while the clinic lights dimmed. This was Whisper. I should have said something right then, something profound or poetic. But all that came out was a broken whisper of his name. He blinked once, tilted his head to the side, and chirped again. Not just a noise, a pattern. Deliberate, soft, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Then he stepped closer, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what this moment meant, you need to know how we got here. 3 weeks earlier, it was late winter in western Montana. The kind of cold that bites through your coat and settles in your bones. I was halfway through morning rounds at the clinic when my assistant, Tom, barged through the back door carrying something wrapped in his flannel jacket. His voice cracked. "Doc, you're gonna want to see this." Inside the bundle was a creature so small, I thought at first it was a feral kitten. But then I saw the paws, oversized, padded, with retractable claws too sharp to mistake. The mottled spots across his fur. The raw pink pads of his feet, torn from struggling against something. "Found him stuck behind the propane tanks by the ranger station," Tom said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Wasn't making a sound until I touched him. Then he went off like a baby owl." He placed the bundle on the exam table and stepped back. I took over, careful not to spook the cub. He was trembling so hard the metal tray rattled beneath him. Every muscle in his body coiled, ready to bolt, but his back legs didn't respond. One was clearly injured, the other wrapped in bramble thorns. "Easy, buddy," I murmured, lowering my voice. "You're safe now." I'd been a wildlife vet for nearly 15 years. I'd helped foxes with frostbite and eagles with broken wings. But nothing about this little guy was ordinary. He didn't hiss, he didn't growl. He just stared at me, wide golden eyes darting between my hands and the tools on the counter, like he was taking it all in. And then, out of nowhere, he chirped, a short staccato sound. Then another, this one higher in pitch. I froze. Animals vocalize, sure, but this wasn't random. It had rhythm, intention. "Are you trying to talk to me?" I chuckled softly. The bobcat blinked slowly, then reached out his paw and tapped the edge of my glove. Tom leaned in from behind. "Doc, did he just answer you?" That was the first moment I felt it. The strange, almost eerie awareness behind those eyes. Like he wasn't just reacting. He was studying, trying to understand me the same way I was trying to understand him. I cleaned the wounds and wrapped the legs. He didn't flinch. But when I turned to reach for the formula bottle, he let out a low, drawn-out whine that almost sounded like a complaint. All right. "Patience, sir," I muttered, holding up the syringe of warm goat's milk. He perked up instantly, ears forward, tail twitching in anticipation. The second I brought it close, he latched on like a starving infant, drinking with wild, desperate gulps. Between swallows, he'd chirp again, like he was narrating the experience. That night, I prepped a small recovery space in the back room. Blankets, a heating pad, a shallow bowl of soft food. But he wouldn't settle. Every time I stepped away, he'd chirp, then whimper, then paw at the crate door, so I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat beside him, on the cold tile floor, and hummed softly into the quiet, a tune my mother used to sing while folding laundry. The cub stopped moving. His breathing slowed. He pressed his head against the bars, not out of fear, but seeking contact. And just before he drifted to sleep, he tapped 3 times against the crate door. A beat. A message. That was the beginning. The next morning, I half expected the cub to be gone, vanished through a crack in the enclosure, maybe chewed through the wiring like a ferret with a grudge. But when I stepped into the back office, there he was, sitting in the middle of the blanket nest, wide awake and staring straight at me like he'd been waiting. He made a sound, part chirp, part soft trill, then tapped the floor twice with his paw. "Good morning to you too," I muttered, shaking off the last of my sleep. "Demanding already, huh?" I brought in his formula and warmed it slowly. He began pacing in tight circles, making a series of short, urgent chirps. His tail flicked in time with each vocalization, like punctuation marks in a language I didn't know how to speak, but somehow understood. I held out the syringe. He sat down immediately, posture perfect, ears forward. As I fed him, I paid close attention to the pattern of his sounds. There was a cadence to them, like syllables in a child's song. Between swallows, he would stop, vocalize a sequence, then continue. Always the same rhythm, always directed at me. Tom poked his head in around the corner. "You two having a conversation again?" I didn't answer right away. I was too focused on the cub's eyes. They weren't the eyes of a frightened animal anymore. They were engaged, alert, curious, almost amused. When the syringe was empty, he did something strange. He licked it clean, set his paw over my hand, and let out a long, low purr that rose and fell in 3 waves. It wasn't random. It was musical. "You're not just surviving, are you?" I whispered. "You're trying to connect." I had to admit it. I was getting attached. We started calling him Jasper. It was Tom's idea. Said the golden hue in his fur reminded him of the stone his wife kept on her necklace. Jasper followed me with his eyes everywhere I went. If I moved across the room, he'd chirp. If I looked away while he was eating, he'd stop and let out a sound until I turned back. He didn't want food. He wanted presence. After a few days, we let him out of the enclosure to test his mobility. His injured leg was healing fast, the wraps coming off in strips. But even with a limp, he hobbled after me from room to room like a shadow with fur. He'd perch on the counter as I filled out forms, sometimes pawing at my pen like he had something to add. People started asking about him. Clients, neighbors, even the UPS guy. "Is that the Bobcat I heard about?" someone would ask at the front desk. "The one who talks?" I didn't know how to explain it without sounding unhinged. But it wasn't just noise. He listened, processed, responded, and he had a sense of timing. He didn't chirp randomly. He waited for gaps, for cues. Like a child learning to speak, only faster. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the clinic floor with a mug of tea and watched him play with a crumpled paper towel. He chased it in slow, exaggerated movements, then paused to glance at me before tossing it into the air with a short trill. "You think that's funny, huh?" He chirped twice, tail swishing. "You know," I said quietly, "you're not supposed to be this attached." He padded over and settled beside me. His body curled tight, but his head rested on my thigh like it was the only place he trusted. Then came the purr, that same rolling, three-wave hum. I closed my eyes. The room felt still, not silent. The hum of the heater, the occasional creak of the old floorboards, but still. A kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Jasper shifted slightly, placing one paw on my hand. A slow blink. A sound I'd come to recognize as his version of a sigh. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel alone. The next week passed in quiet rituals. I'd enter the clinic in the morning to find Jasper already awake, sitting by the door of his enclosure, tail curled neatly around his paws. He always waited until I made eye contact before chirping, as if asking permission to start the day. Every moment we spent together felt like a thread in a growing tapestry of understanding. Jasper learned quickly. When I said his name in a rising tone, he'd respond with a short chirp. When I used a descending tone, he'd hum, low and steady. It wasn't speech, not exactly, but it was communication. Tom began documenting everything. He brought in a field recorder and started logging Jasper's vocalizations, marking them against my own speech patterns. "It's like he's mapping your voice," Tom said one afternoon, shaking his head in disbelief. "Doc, he's mimicking your inflections." "I know," I murmured. "I can feel it." The community caught wind of what was happening. They started stopping by, not for animal checkups, but just to see him. A woman from the bakery brought a fleece blanket with paw prints on it. A retired teacher dropped off a children's xylophone, which Jasper promptly ignored in favor of the box it came in. But even with all the new attention, he only responded to me. If someone else called his name, he stayed silent. But when I entered the room, that melodic trill, every single time. One night, as snow dusted the windows and the clinic settled into its usual hush, I sat alone in the break room, flipping through old notes. Jasper had fallen asleep, curled up near the heating vent, his tail twitching in some quiet dream. I stared at the medical log I'd kept for him. Date of intake, weight, injury, notes on recovery. And at the bottom, under behavioral observations, I'd scribbled, "Possible cognitive mimicry, responds to vocal tone, high social dependence." I put the pen down. "You're not a case file," I whispered aloud. "You're someone." As if hearing me, Jasper stirred. He rose on stiff legs, stretched, and made his way over. He sat beside me and pressed his side against mine, letting out a low rumble. That's when the thought first hit me, the one I tried to ignore. What happens when he's healed? He was a wild animal. Legally, ethically, biologically, he belonged out there, not with me. I'd never intended to keep him. This was rehab, nothing more. But I didn't believe that anymore. Still, nature has rules. Ones I wasn't supposed to break, and Jasper, for all his mimicry and affection, deserved a life beyond walls. That night, as I locked up, I looked back at him through the glass. He was watching me, not with panic, not with fear, but with awareness. Like he knew I was already pulling away. The next morning, I didn't warm the formula right away. I sat beside him instead, and I spoke. Slowly, clearly, like I would to someone I loved. "Jasper, you're going to have to go soon." He tilted his head. "I know. You don't understand the words, but maybe you understand the sound, the feeling." He chirped once. Then, to my shock, he tapped his paw. Once, twice, pause, then 3 times, against my leg. My breath caught. That was the rhythm I used when I knocked on the exam door. He'd memorized it. "You're answering me," I said, voice barely audible. Tom stood in the hallway, watching. He looked pale. "Doc," he said, "we can't just release him, can we?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew the clock had started ticking. By the end of the second week, Jasper was walking without a limp. He could leap onto the low exam table with ease now, curling beside the faucet like it was his throne. His energy was back, but so was something else, a restlessness. He would pace along the windowsill for long minutes, watching the wind tug at the bare trees outside. The world was calling. I knew it. He knew it. But still, each night, he refused to sleep unless I sat on the floor beside him. He'd press his paw against my arm or nestle beneath the fold of my jacket. The moment I moved to leave, he'd wake and chirp, soft, pleading, as if asking just a little longer. Sometimes I stayed. Sometimes I told myself I had work to do, then stood in the hallway, listening to his restless chirps fade into silence. One of those nights, Tom stayed late. He sat across from me in the main office, both of us nursing bitter coffee. "You're not sleeping," he said quietly. "Neither is he." We sat in silence for a while before he added, "I've never seen anything like this. I mean, I've worked rescue cases with you for years. We've bottle-fed coyote pups and soothed wounded hawks. But this Bobcat, he looks at you like you're his person." I didn't answer, because he wasn't wrong. Later that night, I pulled out an old wool shirt from my locker, one I used to wear on night calls. I laid it beside Jasper as he curled on his blanket. He buried his nose into the fabric immediately, let out a low, humming trill, and went still. That was the first night he slept through till morning. It was also the first night I realized I couldn't keep him. I started making plans. I called a friend at the wildlife reserve up north, asked about soft release programs. She told me they had a protected forest clearing and a feeder station already in place. It would be safe, but open. He could come and go until he adjusted. He might try to come back, she warned, especially if the bond is strong. I stared out the window at the dust-colored sky. "Yeah," I said. "I know." I spent the next few days preparing Jasper for the transition. I brought in fresh soil and branches, opened the windows for short bursts so he could smell the wind. Gave him space. He stopped sleeping beside me. It felt like rejection, but deep down I understood. He was weaning himself, not from food, but from me. The night before the release, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the enclosure, the wool shirt folded neatly beside him. He was awake, eyes gleaming in the low light. I didn't say much. I just reached in, ran my hand gently down his back, and let the silence hold us. He blinked slowly. Then he tapped his paw, once, twice, 3 times. I closed my eyes. "Yeah," I whispered. "I'll remember too." The release day came with pale skies and a thin layer of frost still clinging to the ground. We drove in silence. Jasper tucked securely in the carrier on the passenger seat, a fleece blanket lining the bottom. The same one from the bakery woman, now faded from washing. Tom met me at the edge of the tree line. He had brought warm gloves and a thermos of coffee, though neither of us drank it. "Clearing's just beyond that ridge," he said, nodding ahead. "Plenty of cover, water nearby, no predators this time of year." I crouched beside the carrier. Jasper hadn't made a sound the entire ride. He was awake, alert, but calm, the kind of calm that worried me. I opened the door. He didn't move at first. He just stared. Then slowly, he stepped forward, placed one paw on the snow-dusted ground, and paused. The wind caught his fur, ruffling it lightly. He turned back to me. That sound, the chirp, came again. Not sharp or questioning, but low, drawn out, like he was saying something he didn't have words for. I felt my throat tighten. I nodded. "You don't need to thank me," I whispered. "Just be okay." Jasper stepped out fully. The blanket shifted behind him. He sniffed the air, ears turning toward some distant rustle. Then, with one glance over his shoulder, he slipped into the underbrush, a whisper of golden shadow. Gone. Tom exhaled slowly beside me. "You okay?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at the place where he'd vanished. The silence was so complete it rang in my ears. That night, I left the clinic door propped open for a little too long. The next day, and the day after, I checked the carrier. The fleece blanket remained untouched. But it wasn't the blanket that got to me. It was the absence of sound. No chirps, no hums, no rhythmic taps. The clinic was quieter than it had ever been. I kept myself busy. Surgeries, intake appointments, inventory checks. But at night, I'd pass by his old enclosure and catch myself waiting, expecting, hoping. Tom noticed. "You really think he'll come back?" he asked one morning as he loaded supplies. "I don't know," I said. "Part of me thinks he won't. Part of me hopes he doesn't." "Why's that?" "Because it would mean he's thriving out there, living wild, free." But I didn't believe it. Not entirely. Because each night before I left, I'd fold a piece of cloth, the wool shirt, and place it by the window, just in case. The days dragged. A week, then 2. I stopped checking the porch every morning. Stopped looking out the side window after dark. But the silence never felt normal. I missed his voice, or maybe what I missed was mine. The version of me that came alive when he was around. And then, on the 22nd morning, just as the sun breached the ridge, I heard it. A chirp. Low, familiar. Not a bird, not wind. I froze. I moved slowly, heart thudding against my ribs. For a second, I convinced myself it was the wind or a bird call warped by early light. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. A chirp, then 2 soft taps. I stepped onto the porch. There, sitting like a statue in the weak sun, was Jasper. He looked different, bigger. His fur had darkened in places, and his eyes, they weren't just wide with youth anymore. They were calm, knowing. But what caught my breath wasn't his size. It was what he carried in his mouth. A piece of fabric, torn at the edges, faded green. It was my old wool shirt. He padded forward and laid it gently at my feet. Tom had pulled up behind me in his truck, but he didn't get out right away. He just stared. "Doc, is that what I think it is?" I knelt slowly, never breaking Jasper's gaze. "Yeah," I murmured. "It's the shirt I left in the enclosure." Jasper chirped, then tapped his paw once, twice, 3 times. It was deliberate. I reached out a hand, slow, open. He stepped forward, pressed his nose to my palm, and let out that low, familiar purr. The rhythm was unmistakable. 3 soft waves, just like always. Tom finally stepped forward, stunned. He remembered. After all this time, he remembered. I nodded. Couldn't speak. Jasper didn't try to come inside. He didn't need to. He just sat with me, quiet and present, for what felt like an hour. No one moved. The morning breeze rustled the trees, and birds called from somewhere deeper in the woods. Jasper tilted his head with each sound, ears flicking like he was cataloging them. Then, without warning, he stood, looked at me one more time, and with a final chirp, not a goodbye, but a note of recognition, he turned and padded down the porch steps. Back toward the trees, he disappeared into the underbrush. I stayed there long after he was gone, fingers resting on the patch of fabric he'd returned. That night, I didn't close the back door right away. I left the porch light off and sat on the step, the shirt folded in my lap. There were no chirps, no paw taps. But somehow, the silence didn't ache the way it had before. He was out there, not lost, not dependent, just wild and aware. And he knew how to find me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just stood barefoot on the cold floorboards, staring through the screen door at the gray light creeping over the fields. Then came the chirp again, unmistakable. I opened the door. There, just beyond the porch steps, sat Jasper. No carrier, no leash, no enclosure. Just him, waiting. His coat shimmered with dew, and he looked older, not just larger, but seasoned. Like the wild had left its mark on him, but hadn't erased what we had built. He held nothing in his mouth this time, but his eyes. His eyes were the gift. He chirped once, soft, rising, then made a low, three-toned purr that sent a wave through my chest. I stepped outside slowly, hands open. Jasper didn't move. He let me approach. When I crouched, he stepped forward and did something I hadn't expected. He pressed his forehead gently to my knee. No paw taps, no vocal tricks, just presence. I knelt and whispered, "You came back again." He sat beside me like he had never left. No urgency, no fear. The silence was full, not empty. Tom pulled into the lot 20 minutes later and froze mid-step. "Doc," he said, voice low, "is that real?" I nodded, barely breathing. Jasper turned his head toward Tom and let out a short, playful chirp, almost like he was saying, "Told you I'd return." Tom laughed quietly, wiping at his eyes. Well, I'll be damned. Jasper didn't stay long, maybe half an hour. But in that time, I didn't try to confine him. I didn't feed him. I didn't ask for anything. I just sat beside him while the sky turned from gray to blue. When he finally rose, he did it with quiet intention. He turned, walked toward the tree line, and paused one last time. A soft trill, a final glance. Then he was gone. But it didn't feel like goodbye. That night, I left the porch light off again. No expectations. Just a quiet kind of readiness. And sometime after midnight, I heard it, faint, distant, but real. A low purr carried on the wind. Whether it was memory or magic, I couldn't say. But I knew the rhythm. It's been months now. Jasper never stayed long, but he returned again and again. Never on a schedule, never with warning. Sometimes I'd wake to find him sitting silently on the porch just before dawn. Other times I'd hear a faint chirp through the back window and catch a glimpse of his golden coat disappearing into the trees. Each visit was brief, sometimes only minutes. But each one felt like a page in a quiet book we were still writing together. People in town started asking less about him, assuming he'd gone back to the wild for good. I let them believe it. Some stories are best left between those who lived them. But I kept the blanket, the shirt, the empty enclosure tucked away in the back room. Not because I expected him to stay, because I wanted him to know. If he ever needed a place again, he had one. I can't explain what Jasper gave me. It wasn't just the companionship or the mystery of his mimicry or even the strange sense that he understood more than instinct should allow. It was the way he brought stillness back into my life. In a world full of noise, he spoke in silence and rhythm. 3 soft taps, 1 long purr, a slow blink, a paw resting on my hand without claws. There are days I think I hear him, even when he's not here. I'll be elbow deep in paperwork or rinsing a syringe, and I'll pause. Sure, I heard that chirp down the hall. Sometimes I hear it in dreams, that pattern, that call, and I always wake with a warmth in my chest, like some part of him had passed through again. They say wild animals don't form bonds the way humans do, that their interactions with us are rooted in survival or habit, but I know better. Jasper didn't need me. He chose me. And somewhere out there, beneath the canopy of spruce and birch, I like to think there's a bobcat who still remembers the rhythm of my voice, just as I remember his.